Now, evidence uncovered by the subcommittee revealed that Liz Cheney, here it comes, tampered with at least one witness called Cassidy Hutchinson, aka Clavicle Girl, by secretly communicating with Hutchinson without Hutchinson's attorney's knowledge. Cheney and Hutchinson attempted to disbar Stephen Passatino, and Hutchinson misrepresented President Trump's actions at the Lafayette Square Park. Lies. 8 of 8 lies. Based on all of this evidence, numerous federal laws were likely broken. And who broke those laws? Liz Cheney did. Liz Cheney belongs in jail. She committed crimes. That's the conclusion that came out from this report. You can see it's the interim report dropped on December 17, 2024. So this is a fresh one, and it's drafted for us courtesy of Barry Loudermilk, Chairman, Subcommittee on House Administration. Here's what it says. The events of January 6 were preventable. For nearly 4 years, Democrats pushed the narrative that President Trump was solely responsible for the riot at the Capitol. Not true. They spent millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars on a politically motivated witch hunt while failing to legitimately examine how the U.S. Capitol leadership was unable to ensure adequate protection for members of Congress and the staff. Now, that's just a part of it. Incredibly, it would take nearly 4 years for video footage to emerge of Speaker Pelosi in a rare moment of true leadership, right? Really needling her on that. Finally, leadership from Nancy, finally admitting that she was fully responsible for the security failures that day. Now, while Democrats politicize the security and prioritize personal political futures for themselves, the subcommittee's unbiased approach, to our investigation, produced previously undisclosed evidence that undermines the committee. So here's the juicy bits. Based on the evidence obtained by the subcommittee, numerous federal laws were likely broken by Liz Cheney, the former vice chair of the J6 Select Committee. In the beginning of this document, we'll examine how they explain how the Select Committee was illegally constituted under their own rules. And these violations should be investigated by the FBI. Now, evidence uncovered by the subcommittee revealed that Liz Cheney, here it comes, tampered with at least one witness called Cassidy Hutchinson, aka Clavicle Girl, by secretly communicating with Hutchinson without Hutchinson's attorney's knowledge. And this secret communication with the witness is improper, and it likely violates 18 U.S. Code 1512, which is the exact statute that we said she was guilty of a week ago. Such action is outside the due functioning of the legislative process, not allowed to break the law. Menendez got prosecuted for bribery. You can't use your office to call U.S. attorneys and put pressure on them. That's insane. You can't use your position on the J6 committee to go in and interfere with witnesses who are represented by counsel. That's illegal, not protected by the speech and debate clause. Indict her. The FBI must also investigate Representative Cheney for violating 1622, which is suborning perjury, which prohibits any person from procuring another person to commit perjury, which is what, in my opinion, Clavicle Girl Cassidy Hutchinson did. Based on the evidence that was obtained by this subcommittee, Hutchinson, Clavicle Girl, committed perjury when she lied under oath to the committee. And who got her to do that? Liz. Additionally, Hutchinson was interviewed by the FBI as part of its investigation into President Trump. Now, this subcommittee sought a copy of the FBI 302 report documenting this interview, but the FBI has refused to produce this vital document. Doesn't want to hand it over. I wonder why. Now, the FBI must immediately review the testimony given by Hutchinson in this interview to determine if she also lied in her FBI interview. And if so, the role that Liz Cheney played in instigating Hutchinson to radically change her testimony. And Stephen Passatino, her attorney, is the person who was protecting her. Liz Cheney's a lawyer, knows that. You're not allowed to contact and communicate with somebody when they're represented by counsel. It's unethical. But Cheney did it, and she used the power of the Select Committee to do it. Now, the FBI, and hopefully Kash Patel, comes in here and just unloads these reports. Kash, we need Hutchinson's 302, all right? Even if Christopher Wray shredded it, the FBI still has not admitted what records it received from the Select Committee. Of course not. Some statements made by Jack Smith's team revealed that the special prosecutor got witness transcripts that were not publicly released by the committee. So why did Jack Smith get some records, but the American people did not? However, the special counsel has never acknowledged, he's not even a real boy, so what can he acknowledge, how many transcripts he received or whether he has also received video recordings of these transcribed interviews that the Select Committee failed to archive. Now, it is clear from Congressman Benny Thompson's admission that he violated House rules by deleting the Select Committee's recordings of transcribed interviews. The Select Committee recorded hundreds of transcribed interviews, but Thompson chose to delete these recordings, and instead of archiving them as required by the House rules, they didn't do it. As chair of the Select Committee, Thompson was solely responsible for complying with the House rules. By deleting these recordings, they prevented House Republicans from reviewing these videos, which could have contained important information specifically with respect to the interviews of Cassidy Hutchinson. Now, these are crimes that must be fully investigated, and individuals held responsible to maintain the trust of the American people in their government have fallen below the line, and there need to be investigations that happen. In January 2023, McCarthy asked me to look into this. I accepted the assignment on two conditions: that I have autonomy and other things. And so for 24 months, I have been dealing with loser, uncooperative bureaucrats. At one point, the work of the subcommittee was completely halted because we got rid of Kev, and there were internal efforts to derail this investigation. Now, over the course of this investigation, we interviewed hundreds of witnesses, scored over millions of documents, listened to 100 hours of radios, lots of stuff. And they have also talked to people like Stephen Sun. Now, this report reveals that there was not just one single cause for what happened at the Capitol, but there were a series of things. And so they're digging into this. During 10 years in Congress, I've done a lot of things. However, I can say this has given me some of the greatest sense of accomplishment ever. We've had a lot of size and scope, and we've investigated this, but I pray this report is just the beginning of an era of restoring our federal government basic principles of transparency and accountability, two values we talk a lot about here on the show. So Loudermilk is detailing a lot here. The Committee on House Administration that's chaired by Loudermilk has spent a lot of time investigating what happened at the Capitol. And they tell us that throughout its nearly 2 years of work, the Select Committee, they presented uncorroborated, cherry-picked, and at times false evidence that fit its narrative. Thank you, Liz Cheney. The Select Committee did not attempt to even hide its bias. In fact, it memorialized its own failures and prejudice when it published its final report. They wholeheartedly failed to address the security failures on J6, and they say as a result, the Capitol is no safer than it is now than it was back then. And so we're here to provide truth and accountability. They have jurisdiction to do it, and now we get to it. A point that we've made here for a long time and made a lot is that the entire Select Committee was illegitimate, and they should have never been allowed to have pulled the charade that they pulled on all of us. Remember H.R. 503. On June 30th, 2021, the Democrat House majority passed 503, H.R. 503. The Select Committee got an $18 million budget, resulted in a Hollywood theater. For 2 years, they presented uncorroborated, cherry-picked evidence. Now, the composition of the committee was as follows. The day after the House voted on H.R. 503, Pelosi named 7 Democrats and 1 Republican, right? Pelosi comes out perfect. 7 Democrats, 1 Republican. We're going to throw Liz Cheney on there to represent the interest of the Democrats. Then Kevin McCarthy came out and he said, you know what? We're going to put 5 of our people on. And Pelosi rejected it. Said, no, you don't get to pick and have those people on board. Now, despite claiming to model the Select Committee after a 2012 attack, Pelosi didn't extend the same courtesy. She said the unprecedented nature of January 6th means she can appoint whoever she wants. And she did. Now, McCarthy refused to play along. And then Speaker Pelosi, so you might say this was a giant mistake, but McCarthy refused to play along. So he didn't allow any Republicans to get on that committee, withdrew all 5 of them. So then Nancy came and said, okay, well, how about we just put Adam Kinzinger on? And that's good enough. And they created their committee. But according to the rules, this is illegal. Pelosi ignored the rule, despite H.R. 503 literally dictating that there should be 13 members on the committee, 5 of whom were in consultation with the minority leader, Kev. Pelosi put 9, said you have to have 13, 5 Republicans, but nope, 7 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and the whole thing was rigged. They put Jamie Raskin and Adam Schiff on. Both of those guys were impeachment managers. Everything from that point forward was corrupted. The Select Committee's unwritten purpose was to go and get Trump. They were trying to find that he engaged in an insurrection and violated the 14th Amendment. They pushed that idea all over the place. Everybody screaming, insurrectionist, insurrectionist. How'd that work out for him? H.R. 503 mandated that the Select Committee investigate the facts around this and what happened. But still, the Select Committee managed to include Trump's name more than 1,900 times in the report. It was an $18 million government-funded book report project for these people to just smear Trump. Now, despite the rules and what H.R. 503 required, it said the Select Committee should consult with the ranking minority member. But they didn't have a ranking minority member at all. Under House rules, you got to have an actual ranking, minority member. They didn't. They just brought Liz Cheney in, violated their own rules. It's illegal. And they appointed Liz Cheney as a vice chair. This This obfuscation of the rules may discredit its work. This issue has been raised in lawsuits challenging the authority of the committee, but the courts, like baby whiners, chose to avoid the issue by asserting sua sponte the speech and debate clause, right? Well, it's Congress. They're allowed to do whatever they want. The courts are basically making this a separation of powers argument, saying they can do whatever they want. Now, this follows the long-standing trend of federal courts to defer when there are issues within themselves. Because the courts will not interject to declare invalid their attempt to name a member of the opposing party, the role of the ranking member is invalid. Liz Cheney is invalid. That is true. Now, Select Committee's unprecedented exemption. They also exempted themselves from certain rules. Chair Thompson gave him a ton of power, filled it with 5 members that they picked, and they violated the rules there. All committee chairs have the responsibility to archive non-current committee records at the end of each Congress. They keep those for 2 years and then send them to NARA. The resolution that established the Select Committee mandated all records, all of them, be transferred after. Days before the new Republican majority was sworn in, Pelosi sent a letter to Chair Thompson designating the records go to administration. And we reiterated that. Now, Republicans, as soon as they came in, they immediately inventoried all the records, including the printed documents and more. The rules require them to do this. Nevertheless, as part of its investigation, the subcommittee, this committee, learned that they failed to archive or provide the subcommittee with any of its video recordings of witness interviews, as many as any of its video recordings. Okay, none. 0. 900 interview summaries or transcripts, and more than 1 terabyte of digital data. Now, concerningly, of the documents that were archived, the Select Committee delivered more than 100 encrypted, password-protected documents and then never provided the passwords. Unclear why. All intentional. We know why. More than 1 terabyte of data is missing. 250,000 photos, 6.5 million documents, over 4 terabytes of digital data, and 500 hours of video footage. Gone. Missing. Where'd it go? Don't know. Missing video recordings of witness interviews. They interviewed everybody, but then they deleted them. In fact, Representative Cheney noted in her memoir that the Select Committee decided that reading witness transcripts during their primetime hearings was unlikely to be effective. They needed the public to see this. So even Liz Cheney wrote in her little book that it's not good to not have the video. We actually want the video. According to Cheney, the video recordings of their many interviews were indispensable to the committee's efforts to convey its narrative. So video is important. So what happened is Loudermilk sent a letter saying, can we please have the unedited video? And then Thompson replied. He said, sorry, the Select Committee did not archive any of the unedited video recordings of the interviews or depositions because apparently the hard drives are too expensive. Thompson argued that we were not obligated to archive all the video recordings. Sorry, didn't have to. Thompson claimed this determination was based on guidance from the Select Committee. However, according to official guidance, everything should be archived. Videos, everything. He failed to produce any of those records. So without the full videos, we can't know, can't review the full context. They deleted it and they covered up the evidence. So here are all the letters that they sent to Thompson, and Thompson sent back tons of letters back. Loudermilk to Buttigieg, Yellen, Cheadle, Jack Smith got one, tons of people. Garland got one. All deleted evidence to cover it up. Now we talk about Liz Cheney. Former representative who lost her seat in Wyoming by 40 points emerged as a principal figure driving the Select Committee. In May, she said, I will do everything I can to ensure that Trump never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office. Oops, you failed, Liz, and you tried to wreck the country to do it. 6 weeks later, Pelosi named Cheney on the committee. Now, Cheney mentions Trump 18 times in her 4-page forward to the Select Committee's final report. She says, no man who behaved like Trump can ever serve in a position of authority in our nation ever again, and Trump is unfit for office. But she never mentioned anything that went bad that day. She's just ranting like a lunatic. It appears as though she leveraged her unique position to do everything she can to stop Trump from winning. Cheney's influence cannot be overstated. Before the Select Committee published its report, 15 current and former staffers went to the Washington Post to express deep frustration with Cheney and her heavy-handed oversight of the committee. The article states that committee staff members were floored when they were told the final report would focus almost entirely on Trump. That's all. Another staff member stated, when the Select Committee became a Cheney 2024 campaign, many of us became discouraged. And the article continues, people familiar with the work said that Cheney was far more hands-on than Benny Thompson, clearly. Now, her exhaustive efforts, they couldn't produce a narrative to blame it on Trump because he didn't do anything. The Select Committee needed a star witness. It was failing. It was floundering. People were bored out of their minds. So then they had to come out and bring in Cassidy Hutchinson. Through thousands of hours of interviews, interrogation of hundreds of witnesses, the Select Committee chose to base its conclusions on uncorroborated and inconsistent testimony from one person, clavicle girl, Cassidy Hutchinson. She gave the committee exactly what they were looking for. Now, she was a 24-year-old special assistant to the president, worked with Mark Meadows. Prior to this, she was at the White House internship program. Now, according to testimony by White House employees who worked closely with Hutchinson, her responsibilities were just following Meadows around. That's it, administrative duties within the office. She communicated regularly with other White House employees to organize Meadows' calendar. She had her desk located near a doorway leading to Meadows' office. Now, despite initial reporting that Hutchinson became unemployed for a period of time at the end of the first Trump administration, now it was revealed she continued to work as a coordinator for Trump's official taxpayer-funded post-presidential office from January 20th, 21 to April 1st, 2021. And she earned a salary of 90 G's for that. That's according to GSA. Among the many unsubstantiated claims by Hutchinson throughout her interactions with Cheney, Hutchinson said she was, quote, disgusted by Trump's actions and called him unpatriotic and un-American. It's noteworthy then that Hutchinson continued working for him for 9 weeks after his presidency. She was disgusted, but not that disgusted that she couldn't cash in her paychecks for 90 G's. Not that grossed out. Despite the testimony she gave against his character and action, she still wanted to get paid, making sure that direct deposit's still coming in. Multiple reports also say that Hutchinson planned to move to Mar-a-Lago with Trump. However, Trump came to believe that Hutchinson was responsible for leaking the list of employees, and he personally disinvited Hutchinson from moving. Wow. Before the Select Committee was formed, President Trump had heard negative things about Hutchinson, including that she was a total phony and a leaker. In a post from his Truth Social, he asked, "Why did she want to go with us to Florida if she thought we were so terrible?" The subcommittee couldn't answer that. So Cassidy then claimed that Meadows informed her in her final days of the administration she's not going to go work for Trump in Mar-a-Lago. Unclear why. When she had her last day for Trump, don't know. But it remains a fact that nearly a year after the events of J6, she contacted the Trump team to get an attorney to help her with the J6 committee. And we saw that. She had an attorney called Stephen Passatino. Now, the Select Committee then began interviewing hundreds of people it thought were connected to the J6. Hutchinson was one of them. She could not afford an attorney, so she contacted allies of Trump, Eric Hirschman, Alex Cannon. They got her connected with Stephen Passatino, the lawyer who Cassidy was like ratting out to Liz Cheney. Cassidy was texting Liz, "This is what my lawyer thinks. What do you think?" I'm like, I could feel Stephen just getting knifed in the back. I can empathize with that, man. To represent Hutchinson at no cost. At no cost. Initially, Hutchinson gave 2 under oath testimonies. Okay, she spoke twice for several hours. Those 2 lengthy yet largely insignificant interviews with Hutchinson did nothing. Limited notoriety. Several news outlets attributing claims of Republican politicians seeking pardons, foreknowledge of violence leading up to J6. That's all. Pretty boring. But they're like, Cassidy, you got to spice this up, man. What are you doing? You've got to really get creative here. Now, following her second interview, Hutchinson drastically switched her narrative, began testifying to a variety of unsubstantiated and uncorroborated claims that ultimately made it into the final report. Now, it's not entirely clear why Hutchinson suddenly altered her testimony, but the subcommittee has uncovered evidence of secret conversations between her and Alyssa Farah Griffin, who's on The View, and troublingly, conversations between Hutchinson, Cheney, without the knowledge of her attorney. For nearly a month, The View's Farah Griffin acted as an intermediary between Cassidy and Cheney. As an intermediary, she helped coordinate a third interview without the knowledge of her lawyer, Stephen, which is unethical. They knew she was represented. In a television panel with a member of the Select Committee, Representative Raskin, a year following the end of the committee, Hutchinson freely stated that, quote, she had back-channeled for a third interview without her attorney's knowledge with Alyssa Griffin. Busted. Now, at this time, Griffin and Hutchinson discussed the optics of this new information and what happens if she testifies. Her messages indicate that she and Griffin colluded to create a false story about why Hutchinson needed to do a third interview. Why? And why did they need to convince her attorney, Passatino? It's like an operation. If she's unhappy with Passatino, she can fire him. But she's colluding, and they're colluding her, taking advantage of her to try to sell a story to her attorney. Okay? It's witness interference, it's tampering. They're manipulating her story and exploiting her to do it. So here are the emails. Cassidy sent this one. I know you're busy, Alyssa, but is there a chance you've touched base with anyone regarding what we talked about on Tuesday night? Alyssa, hey, yes. So I reached out to Liz. She agreed to keep our convo totally confidential. She said she admires you and could tell you wanted to do the right thing from your testimony testimony. Her one concern was, so long as you have counsel, that's Liz Cheney. That's knowledge, intentionality. She's got a guilty mind. She can't really ethically talk to you without him, but what she suggests is a follow-up with you, with your lawyer that she and Dan George can lead. Probably can do without other members and Tim. Does that help at all? I can tell she really wants to work with you and is just trying to figure out the right way to do it because you've got a lawyer. I mean, do you think this is actually of interest to her at this point, or is this moot? Like, have they moved beyond it? So Cassidy's free. She's like, I need to make a mark somehow. Do I have anything valuable? Then in her May 17th transcribed interview, Hutchinson testified to a series of uncorroborated and unverified stories. She shows up, starts spilling her guts about clavicle attacks, Melania hanging out of a helicopter, and more. Despite already testifying to the committee twice, suddenly she's got new information. Wow, where'd that come from? Incredible. Now it says the subcommittee was only able to obtain a limited number of text messages, but Cheney's influence is apparent by her dramatic change in testimony. She came out, used second, third-hand accounts. She claimed that Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato told her that Trump lunged towards the Secret Service driver and grabbed him by the clavicle, is what she said. This story has never been corroborated, all right? And it was literally directly refuted by both Secret Service agents in the vehicle and by Tony Ornato himself. 3 people all declined it, saying she's nuts. I didn't tell her that, and it never happened. So she just made it up. Liz Cheney says perfect. Oh, and you didn't remember that the first 2 times? Who cares? Doesn't matter. As long as you remember it now. Now, after her 3rd interview, Hutchinson reached out to Cheney directly. While Hutchinson revealed the general timing of those conversations in her book, the extent and the content of your communications were not previously disclosed until they were discovered here. When Hutchinson texted Cheney, she was still represented by Pasatino, and Cheney knew it. Cheney and Hutchinson communicated for days without Pasatino's knowledge. Now, it is unusual and potentially unethical for a member of Congress conducting an investigation to contact a witness if a member knows the individual has a lawyer. That's why you get a lawyer. Cheney's a lawyer, and an attorney who circumvents an individual's legal representation, like Liz, would violate attorney ethics in Washington, regardless of who initiates the contact. Now, while it's not clear how the DC bar would apply to this rule to a member of Congress that they love, like DC, like they love Liz Cheney, like Liz Cheney portraits up. The rules say, don't communicate when someone's represented. You can't talk to them about the subject matter of the representation. This appears to be exactly what Cheney did at this time. Within a matter of days of these secret conversations, Hutchinson would go on to recant her previous testimony and then introduce her most outlandish claims. Now, it must be emphasized, Cheney would likely have known her communications without the knowledge of Hutchinson's attorney were illicit and unethical at that time. Farrah Griffin indicated as much. Said Cheney's one concern was, we can't really talk with you. You got a lawyer. But then they were talking. Understandably, Cheney attempted to distance herself from the appearance of impropriety after she published her book. She said, well, we didn't want to be advising her on what she did next, but of course they did. Now, the influence on Hutchinson went beyond contacting Hutchinson directly. Cheney also played a primary role in getting her to fire her lawyer. He was free. According to Cheney, her concerns for respecting ethical boundaries limited her, so she passively waited for Hutchinson to fire her lawyer. No, Liz Cheney was racing and helping her to do that. Unfortunately for Cheney, this is what Cheney wrote in her book. Not long after this interview, Cassidy contacted me. She told me that she was inclined to represent herself going forward. I said, oh no, I'm sympathetic. You can't represent yourself. I don't want our committee to be advising you. So how about this? Since you fired him, how about you could find another lawyer and then get their independent advice? Yeah, says Liz. I just want to help. Okay. Well, Hutchinson recalls it differently. In her book called Enough, that horrible photo of her on the front, Hutchinson stated that not only did Cheney play an integral part in Hutchinson's developing testimony, but even gave Hutchinson a list of attorneys to replace her current lawyer. Clavicle said, well, I asked if she or any members of the committee staff might know an attorney who would be willing to put me on a payment plan. Liz says she'd follow up. The next day, she gave me info for multiple attorneys at various firms. I thanked her and promised I'd go out and do the right thing, and it was one of the greatest gifts I could have ever received. Hope. Then she went and got a lawyer. In signal messages recovered from Loudermilk, they demonstrate that Cheney and Hutchinson spoke directly with one another several days before Hutchinson fired her lawyer, swinging from one branch to the other. What other information was communicated during their phone calls, we don't know. But what is known is Cheney consciously attempted to minimize her contact with Hutchinson in her book. No. She called me. I said, I can't help. Call someone else. The most likely reason to try to bury that information is because she knows it was unethical. On June 9th, 22, Hutchinson formally ended her attorney-client relationship with Stephan Pasatino the same day she got lawyers that Cheney recommended. In a twist of irony then, Cheney spoke out forcefully against the individuals who endeavored to influence witness testimony in the Select Committee, screaming at them. At the end of the Select Committee hearing, Cheney said, let me say this, everybody. We will take, Liz Cheney's lecturing America, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously. Meanwhile, Clavicle Girl's like, you mean except me, right? In an interview, Cheney reportedly stated, we may make criminal referrals if you're trying to influence witness testimony. Oh, Liz, it's you. You're talking about yourself. Now, whether lacking in self-awareness, yes, or to obfuscate her own furtive behavior, it is consistent with their practice of lodging accusations of things they're doing themselves. So then on June 20th, less than 2 weeks after Hutchinson fired Pasatino, Hutchinson came and sat for her fourth interview. New lawyers. Now, prior to this interview, nearly every interview conducted had a dozen people in it, including committee staff, committee counsel, members of the Select Committee, an interviewee, legal representation. Phew, tons of people, big room. Most of the interviews were done in large conference rooms or over Zoom, space for all participants. But Hutchinson's fourth interview was a little bit different for some reason. Only 4 people were in the room this time. Cheney, a Select Committee attorney, Hutchinson, and Hutchinson's new attorney. Fun. Additionally, instead of the Select Committee conducting the interview in a conference room or virtually, Cheney used her private hideaway inside the United States Capitol building. Very secretive. Now, in light of the extravagant nature of Hutchinson's claims, it would be prudent for the Select Committee to invest a portion of its resources to investigating Hutchinson's claim. Did you guys try to verify it? Never happened. She just rushed her narrative into the public domain. Just days before the public testimony, the committee had revised its schedule. They were going to postpone hearings for several weeks. But then, no, Cheney scheduled an emergency public hearing. It was urgent. 6 days after Hutchinson's fourth interview, Cheney gave Hutchinson a preparatory walkthrough of the caucus room. She testified the following day. National audience, television primetime, June 28th. A clavicle attack. Cheney's decision to rush the testimony didn't provide an opportunity to vet the questions. Now, it's no surprise that the claims made in Hutchinson's first 2 interviews are totally different. The interviews, the first 2, were consistent with one another, but the last 2 were very different. Maybe why they released the text of the interviews in reversed order. They released the bad stuff first. And at the beginning of this investigation, the subcommittee reached out to the FBI to get the 302, their interview summary, and to date, they've not responded to their request. So as we can see, Cheney stole her from her lawyer, and then her testimony changed. They rushed the hearing in front of all of us. They made a giant deal about it. Remember, it was like the biggest thing that week. I can't believe Trump did all those things. Cassidy was the only witness to testify to specific outrageous claims. Nearly all of her allegations involve not being an eyewitness at all. And the parties that she credited for telling her those things denied what she said. Ultimately, Chairman Loudermilk and others uncovered evidence that disprove her 8 most sensational claims. Nothing is true. Her willingness to testify under oath to these demonstrably false claims means she's unreliable. The committee's decision to craft its narrative on this unchallenged, uncorroborated information lacks any credibility at all. They tell us here are some of the key findings. President Trump did not attack his Secret Service detail at any time on January 6th. You're kidding. There was no pre-planned off-the-record move to the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6th. Another lie. There's no evidence that Trump ever agreed with rioters who chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." No one agreed with that. Cassidy Hutchinson falsely claimed to have drafted a handwritten note for President Trump on J6. She didn't. That was Eric Hirschman's handwriting. We saw the compare and contrast of the 2 handwriting fonts. She writes like in bubble letters like a Cassidy Hutchinson would. And Eric Hirschman writes in blocky letters like I would. And he writes like that. It's totally different. She didn't write anything. President Trump did not have intelligence indicating violence on the morning of J6 because the feds hadn't caused it yet. Cassidy Hutchinson lied about the classification status of documents to disparage Mark Meadows. They weren't classified. Cheney and Hutchinson attempted to disbar Stephen Pasatino, and Hutchinson misrepresented President Trump's actions at the Lafayette Square Park. Lies. 8 of 8 lies. And they go through each one after another. The clavicle, perhaps, is the biggest. Here was her testimony. They said, in public testimony, Hutchinson said, when the car started moving, I'm under the impression from the story as Tony had retold it, it just made Mr. Trump irate. And he lunged forward into what I believe is would be called the cab of the presidential limo and went to grab at the steering wheel. And Bobby had said, sir, I'm going to need you to take your hand off the wheel. We're going back to the White House. That's final. Mr. Trump again was extremely angry at that response, and he used his free hand, to my understanding, is to lunge at Bobby Engel, and he attacked him in the clavicle. Ah! Hutchinson motioned towards her clavicle while describing the incident. The Select Committee previously transcribed interviews under oath with Engel and Ornato. Neither of those witnesses made any mention of anything like that. In fact, they categorically deny Hutchinson's story. So it's unclear why Liz Cheney did not seek to ask those people, Ornato and Engel, about this. Those three eyewitnesses were never interviewed again. They chose to promote Hutchinson's version of the event instead of all three of the others, citing a series of other unnamed individuals who were removed. Engel said this about the attack. All right, do you remember him, any kind of physical gesture? Did he lunge Trump? Any kind of gesture at all when he told you he couldn't go to the Capitol? Secret Service says, no, sir. Was he agitated? I didn't sense him as being agitated. Was there a heated argument in the Suburban? No, sir. Was the president irate? I would not describe him as irate. What kind of weird questions are these? Select Committee did not give Trump's Secret Service any opportunity to give his version until November. He testified that he had not even been contacted by the committee in any way until that time. The driver said the following. Okay, so prior to June 28th, which I believe was Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony in front of the committee, I had not been interviewed by any investigative body or the Secret Service internally concerning these events. So they shoved Cassidy up there, didn't even ask anyone else. And then obviously on June 28th, in a public hearing of this committee, Cassidy Hutchinson made accusations or relayed accusations that the president had tried to commandeer his limousine by grabbing the steering wheel, which is like an insane thing to do, right? To go through the window, to grab the steering wheel, Trump's going to drive it. He says, I was in the car. Obviously, I was driving. This guy says, neither of those things happened, okay? It's just ridiculous. So waiting nearly 5 months to interview the two Secret Service agents and Ornato, who could verify Hutchinson's story, is unjustifiable. The Select Committee and their apparent lack of interest in investigating any of this stuff is inappropriate. The driver clearly stated here, neither of those things happened at all. Ms. Cheney asked the following. Thanks, Mr. Harris. First of all, I just want to thank the special agent for his testimony. I just want to ask, though, is it the agent's understanding that Ms. Hutchinson's testimony to the committee was that there had been an actual physical assault in the SUV? Physical assault. So she's trying to distinguish between a physical assault and a physical altercation. Was it assault, altercations? But nothing fits. They said, doesn't matter whether it's an assault or an altercation, neither of those things happened. And so Cassidy's a liar, Liz Cheney's a liar, and it's now coming out. We see there were more things. Trump was not supportive of the hang Mike Pence stuff, as we know. We saw fact finding number 4. She did not write the handwritten note. Let's see if they have the notes. Cheney, and there's a chief of staff note card that you wrote. Is that your handwriting, Miss Hutchinson? That is my handwriting. And why did you write this note? Well, the chief of staff was in a meeting and they had rushed out of the office quickly. Mark handed me a note and so I wrote it. No, you didn't. This is the note. Anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately. That's the note. You know who wrote that note? Eric Hirschman. This is Hutchinson's writing example. It looks like little bubbly, girly letters, right? Look, there's a little cross and hearts and a little peace sign. See that? Like she does like a little heart over the eye, maybe. Cassidy, heart, love you. Bubbly, looks like a girl's handwriting. This is Hirschman's handwriting. Eric Hirschman, the guy who was in the room, she said. That's how he writes. That's what it looks like. That's the note. She did not write that note. She lied about the note. So conclusion that the evidence says the handwriting was written in the same hand as the exemplars. Trump had no intelligence on the morning of that there was going to be violence because the feds hadn't done it yet. Cassidy also lied about the classification status of documents that were being passed back and forth between Mark Meadows. She didn't know what the status was, and she claimed she did. And they also tried to get Stephen Passatino, her lawyer, disbarred. Okay, that was Liz's direction. How do you feel about just doing it with your lawyer, says Alyssa, but answering more questions? You know, you can handle yourself, and he's just a figurehead. Cassidy said, okay, I can call him and basically give an ultimatum. We'll come back, but we need assurance that she won't be called in, which I don't think they'll give, or you won't give us assurance, reissue a subpoena to force me to come in. Stephen says, right, look, he's not against me complying. He's actually sort of willing to do it because he thinks it builds my credibility, but he wants just enough from the committee to balance out the public backlash from the lawsuit and to reframe me as super compliant and respectful of congressional subpoenas. Okay, so Stephen is like fighting for Cassidy. Sounds very smart and logical. So he's going to call George this afternoon. Can you tip off Liz or Dan, and can you see their thoughts? Cassidy is passing information from her lawyer to Liz through Alyssa. I'm personally fine with just Liz and Dan, but I have a feeling that he'll want it structurally the same as the others, but I haven't gotten that far with him. And so they were working. They filed bar complaints against him. They were all dismissed. He was cleared of all allegations, but it just shows how far they'll go to smear their lawyers. Cassidy also misrepresented President Trump's actions at Lafayette Square. She wrote in her book, on the flight back, the president had expressed desire, calling attention to this stuff, but she also made other baseless claims, like Trump giving an order to clear Lafayette Park, already thoroughly debunked, never gave those those orders. So just kind of making stuff up, which is what Cassidy does. So in conclusion, Hutchinson's testimony formed the basis of the committee's false but most enduring claims against Trump. She was a star witness and a liar. Without Hutchinson's altered testimony, unlikely the committee could make its assertions about Trump's mood, attitude, alleged culpability. Hutchinson is mentioned by name no fewer than 185 times in their final report. Now, inexplicably, the Select Committee discredited other legitimate witnesses who, under oath, repeatedly refuted her testimony. These people are senior government officials and federal agents who are legitimate. Now, as we know, the Select Committee failed to do its due diligence. They just shoved her into the prime time slot. Her story about President Trump reaching from the steering wheel appears for the first time in interview number 4. Between her 4th interview and her public testimony only a week later, they did not corroborate anything. Each hearing was preceded by 2 rehearsals. They rehearsed it. They gave her a watch and a monologue timer. It was planned and executed. Everything. Except for Hutchinson's, they just rushed her out there with only 3 hours notice for other members. Okay, Benny Thompson's like sitting on the toilet. He's like, what? The evidence is overwhelming. They violated House rules. They deleted evidence. She had a predetermined partisan outcome of the committee, and they disregarded all the truth that happened here, and they instead took Hutchinson's false fake statements and they put those in front of America. It was a total scam. The Select Committee took measures to retrieve some documents. They got a bunch of stuff. Transcripts came out. A lot of additional interviews came out. Other unnamed employees got transcripts on. And we want to know, who these people were ultimately, but a lot of the evidence is gone, right? I mean, if they're unnamed, unless you can corroborate them by connecting the dots, there's no videos. And as we saw in some of these interviews, the depots and the documents, the redactions are monstrous. So I'm not even sure you could see what is inside. There's also HBO footage, which we talked about. Nancy Pelosi saying that we have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of this thing when they've already breached their stuff, we should call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard. Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with, says Nancy. Well, it's because Mayor Muriel Bowser rejected President Trump's offer to send them there. Well, they thought they had sufficient resources. No, it's not a question of how they had. They don't know. They clearly didn't know. And I take responsibility, says Nancy, for not having them just prepare for more. Good. It is her responsibility. It was Congress. It was the Capitol. It was not the White House. It's not Trump's building. That's the executive branch. Now, the DOD also conducted an investigation, but they failed in many ways to get to the bottom of it. Here are more findings. The acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, dismissed Trump's order to use any and all military assets to ensure safety for the planning on J6. Christopher Miller got a direct order from the president. Acting Secretary of Defense didn't follow through. Trump ordered it. They didn't follow. The Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, intentionally delayed the National Guard. Although approved by the Secretary at 3:04, McCarthy delayed and failed to communicate deployment orders to the commanding general of the DC National Guard. Totally intentional. Finding 3. At 3:18 on January 6, Secretary of Army Ryan McCarthy deliberately deceived congressional leaders by stating the National Guard was moving to the Capitol, but he knew those forces did not get those orders. These false statements contributed to decisions made by congressional leaders about the security response to the Capitol. All right, so all eyes on Ryan McCarthy now, because he's got 2 in here that he intentionally delayed. What was that about? Department of Defense Inspector General published a flawed report that contains fabricated information because they investigated themselves, fails to interview key individuals, and appears to have collaborated with DOD to portray a false narrative. The DOD lied. They probably orchestrated the whole thing. The DOD and DOD IG knowingly and inaccurately placed the blame on DC Guard leadership, but it was their fault. And the DOD IG was not responsive to our request at all. They investigated themselves and found they did nothing wrong. Now, the DC National Guard was founded in 1802, and the president can do stuff with it. Secretary of Army Ryan McCarthy maintained approval for this. Here's the org chart and how it works. All these other people are in the chain before the president. President asked the mayor for 10,000 National Guard. She said no. President ordered acting Secretary of Defense Christopher Miller, secure the Capitol. Declined. Didn't do it. So why is he being blamed for this? Who knows? Well, we know because they wanted to try to prevent him from winning and they failed. The National Guard is supposed to protect things and they didn't in this time. Christopher Miller similarly dismissed Trump's order to secure the location. The president just says like this. In his testimony, Milley said this. The president just says, hey, look at this. It's going to be a large amount of protesters coming here on the 6th, and make sure that you have sufficient National Guard or soldiers to make sure it's a safe event, Milley says. And Miller responds by saying, hey, we've got a plan and we've got it covered. And that's about it. That's what happened. Now, Milley revealed that Trump gave the order, make make sure it's safe. That never came out in those interviews, in Liz Cheney's little book reports to America. Miller said, we've got it covered. Just make it safe. But they didn't. In fact, here's another thing. Acting Secretary Miller memo established restrictions and measures, and its deployment requested by Bowser. So here was this. Now, Miller published the memo to approve the use of National Guard. He said, use Guard, use soldiers, use whatever you have to do. Just make sure it's safe. We've got a plan. We've got it covered. Then Miller, the DOD interviewed him, the Inspector General. Miller was asked if he ever thought that, the DOD might need to do something at the Capitol. Did you have to do anything? He says, well, the operational plan was this. Let's take the DC Guard, keep them away from the Capitol, and we'll make it a safe event. But he says, Miller said this, there is absolutely no way I was putting U.S. military forces at the Capitol. That would be the greatest constitutional crisis since the Civil War, right? Nobody wanted to arm it up. And we heard that because they said Trump is just going to take over the country if we allow him to do that. Miller's statements reveal that his decision-making rationale was he was concerned about being a Trump crony, and he was concerned about what they would say on X and on Twitter at the time. And they were saying, we can't let him bring the Guard out there because they wanted the whole thing to fail. Then McCarthy intentionally delayed the response to the Capitol, found it unusual. Here are some of the notes. This is Rick McCarthy. He says, I withhold authority to approve employment of the Quick Reaction Force. Sent that on J5. So we're not going to deploy the Quick Reaction Force, but the rules say he should have been considering that, and he specifically did not. And then on January 6th, he deceived congressional leaders that he didn't move them. I thought we had them moved. Nope, don't have them moved. He made a phone call. Speaker Pelosi says, did you talk to your boss? McCarthy said, I did. Yes, we have the green light. The National Guard are moving. No, they weren't. Another lie. Now, the Department of Defense also published a flawed report. They withheld a bunch of information about information that exonerated Trump. There were transcripts that Miller and others know that Trump said, secure the place. If he wanted to insurrect the Capitol and take over the building, which I guess means you're in control of the country, which is a stupid thing that the left was obsessed with. If he got the podium, he has total power forever. But here, he actually wanted it secured. So how can he want both? You can't. They hid it. They also possessed information that the Army was misleading Congress and delaying the National Guard. They published misleading information and were lying in their reports. As we continue, a lot of excerpts from transcripts and testimony to corroborate these points. They selectively published things, and the DOD report was just trash. All right, that's what this is all about. And it always is, because they investigate themselves and they find they did nothing wrong. They knowingly and inaccurately place the blame on the National Guard, who always gets dumped on by the DOD and other entities. And then there were whistleblowers. Other people came out and testified about how serious this was. All these accomplished people were testifying about what happened. Many current and former members had concerns. All four whistleblowers testified under oath. They made claims. They say the IG report are wholly inaccurate. These fake phone calls that are being made up in there. Colonel Matthews participated in a transcribed interview, testified about this, and many other people testified that their reports of themselves are just terrible. The U.S. Capitol maintains a network of 1,600 cameras. When the subcommittee got CCTV footage from the Capitol, Loudermilk committed to releasing as much footage as considerations would allow. Over more than 6 months, they've released more than 44,000 videos, all on Rumble. These releases are enabled for all of us. Now, they maintain viewing room for others to come check and a terminal for people to come watch. But the pipe bomb and the pipe bomber will be released as a separate report. Law enforcement response to the pipe bomber and the investigation into the pipe bomb suspect will all be released later. So interesting. We have questions about feds in the crowd. So maybe that is one fed. Also about the gallows. Some of the most sensationalized images were related to the gallows, which we saw a lot of. And they recreate what happened with the group. Two men enter the intersection. Minutes later, they get a coffee. They're setting up the gallows. The following map shows where they went. Tons of cameras. They walked by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, walked by Jones Day, U.S. Department of Labor, federal courthouse, and more. And then they just went and set up the gallows. Still don't know the full story there. Now, how about law enforcement and their response? After the assassination attempt this year of Trump, we know that there are many outstanding reports about how bad the Secret Service is. Now, the number of Secret Service agents inside the Capitol with Pence were limited, and a lot of letters have gone out demanding more information. And here are the media archives for your perusal. And in conclusion, I think the biggest takeaway here is this. Based on all of this evidence, numerous federal laws were likely broken. And who broke those laws? Liz Cheney did. 18 U.S. Code 1512 subsection B, witness tampering. 18 U.S. Code 1622, suborning perjury. Liz Cheney should be investigated. There's plenty of probable cause in this document that she is not protected by Congress, not protected by the speech and debate clause. She knew what she was doing. After the fact, after this was all over, she tried to then write a book to cover it up and recraft the story. And she thought she was going to get away with all this because they won, or were going to win, but they did not win. They lost. And now this investigation hopefully opens up wider than ever before. Now, Capitol Hill Chief of Police Stephen Sun is celebrating today, says, "My story hasn't changed. Since my first testimony in 2021, I have remained steadfast in the truth. With this congressional report fully vindicating and exonerating me, I am focusing on moving forward, guided by leadership, integrity, and accountability. I'm grateful for the committee's diligence and the support that I've received from so many." I checked on with Liz Cheney. Has she responded to this? No, she hasn't. She still has her bitter post up from the November 6th, the day after the election, where she had to realize that all of her efforts to try to rig American justice, her perversion of her ethical obligations, the total evaporation of her integrity, the lying to the American public, all to stop Trump, has failed. And now, hopefully, a proper investigation is done, and if there's probable cause for criminal charges, those come down the pike as well.